Hi, thanks for joining me for Bible study. It's going to be more of just kind of a reading this evening as we're looking in Hebrews, and we're going to read a little bit of what we looked at a month ago and then see how it transitions to the next big section of the letter to the Hebrews, as he is going to pick up that thought of Jesus being our high priest, because Jesus was of the family of David, of the tribe of Judah, and the priesthood had been appointed by God back in the days of Moses to be of the tribe of Levi and descendants of Aaron. And so this is an unfamiliar territory for the Jewish people, but not entirely. And so the writer of Hebrews is going to draw out from the scriptures the defense of how Jesus can be our legitimate high priest. And so we're going to pick up with chapter 4 and read from verse 14 of chapter 4, and we're going to read to verse 11 of chapter 5. Because remember, the chapter and verse markings are not original to what the writer used. They're just added later for our benefit to help us find our way around, right? So let's see what we got. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. Seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. For every high priest taken from among men is appointed for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts and sacrifices for sins. He can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. Because of this, he is required, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer sacrifices for sins. And no man takes this honor to himself, but he who is called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not glorify himself to become high priest, but it was he who said to him, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." As he also says in another place, "You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek," who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications, with vehement cries and tears, to him who is able to save him from death, and was heard because of his godly fear. Though he was a son, yet he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him, called by God as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say and hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. Now, I want to kind of give you some summary thoughts of this, because the writer of Hebrews is writing to a group of people that in some ways are similar to us. We're not very familiar with high priests and things like that. So most of what we know is what we read from the scriptures. Now, some denominations and such will have priests and things like that, but that's not the background that we come from here at our church. And so even theirs is a little different than what we see in Leviticus, Exodus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, the priesthood, descendants of Aaron. And the writer of Hebrews says those priests have an important role in that they not only offer gifts and sacrifices, but they're making intercession for brothers and sisters, so to speak, because they're of the human race. Angels can't be intercessors for us because they're not humans. They don't have the same weaknesses and challenges that we have. Whereas another human can have compassion because he understands what it means to be human. And this is where the people he's writing to, they're not familiar with the excesses and abuses and failings of the current priesthood that was going on in this time up until the Romans destroyed the temple. Rather, their familiarity with the priesthood probably had more to do with what they had read in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so they see the ideal there, so to speak, at least of what had been known among humans. But he says there was a weakness there that was a problem. One, the weakness helped them identify with other humans, but then they were also sinners like other humans, and they had to make sacrifices for their own failings as well as for the failings of others. And the reality is, the sacrifice was even bigger for them to come closer to God in order to make intercession for those who were farther from God. But they were still with a God-ordained appointment to the priesthood. I don't think Aaron would have chose that role, especially if he'd known what was involved in it, which in his case cost him his two oldest sons because they were not worthy of the role. And that was a burden upon that family from then on. So also our better high priest, Christ, familiar with our weaknesses. He was a fellow human. He put on human flesh, just like us. And so he quotes from Psalm 2 again, just as he did in chapter 1. You are my son. Today I've begotten you. Christ put on flesh, the incarnation that we celebrate at Christmas, that God the Spirit used the womb of the Virgin Mary to craft a human, fully human, yet without the sin nature that is inherent in being a descendant of Adam, so that he would take Adam's place and resist temptation, as we saw back in chapter 4. And that accompanied with our weakness, that's what verses 7 and following are talking about. He endured that weakness, challenges, temptations without sin, but yet still an obedience forged in the crucible, as he, with vehement cries and tears, pleaded with his Father, yet always not my will, but thy will, God, be done. And so you see that in the garden, as I just quoted there. You see that in the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? Taking the sin of the world upon himself, he suffered the alienation from his Father, even to the point of, in his last cry, into your hands I commit my spirit. And he committed his spirit to the Father to vindicate him, which was, he overcame death not by avoiding it, but by going through it and raising from the dead. He was saved from death in that way. Because of why? Godly fear. He obeyed his Father. Even when he was with natural desires of avoiding pain, avoiding death, he trusted. He learned obedience by the things which he suffered. And having been perfected, having completed the task, becoming our righteousness, he is the author, he is the founder of our eternal salvation to all who obey him. Obey him how? In repentance and faith and trusting, obedient, following him. Because he is our high priest, he can make that kind of intercession for us, completing this for himself. And then we're reminded both here and back in chapter 4, this is the reinforcement of what we saw at the end of chapter 4. We do not have a high priest who can't sympathize with our weaknesses. So therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in our time of need. We have one who can help us persevere, help us follow, help us trust, even when we're weak and struggling in our own sins and temptations. And so he's going to unpack that thought even more after he gets onto them for not progressing in their faith. He says, you've got a lot to learn. I feel like I have a lot to learn as well. But thank you for joining me for this. We'll be touching on this again and again, especially in relation to the suffering, because that's an important role in this letter for them to understand who themselves are suffering, that it does have a role in their life to make them more like Christ. But in the meantime, we can cry out to him, help us in our time of need. God bless, God keep you. Look forward to seeing you next time.